Digital Society, an irregular podcast about life with technology produced by Dr. Travis Holland, that's me, at Charles Sturt University. Forget the glossy brochures and sci-fi fantasies. We're here to get our hands dirty and uncover what really powers those algorithms and neural networks widely known as artificial intelligence. And to dig into it all, I've got a special guest with me here, Daniel Whelan-Sharmy. Hi, Dan.
Hey, kia ora, Travis. How you doing?
Well, thanks. Look, could you tell me a little bit about yourself, and then let's talk about your research.
Yeah, man. So I'm a second year PhD candidate up at the Queensland University of Technology. My work, very broadly, looks at artificial intelligence and how it's changing our relations, communication, and writing.
Mm-hmm. So that's a really interesting question, right? Because there's a lot of work going on. I was reflecting basically every industry now. There's papers and there's opinion pieces and blogs and podcasts saying this is how AI is changing this industry. But you're thinking about broader notions of ownership, right? Is that how or authorship, maybe?
Yeah, completely. Yeah. There's just, like you say, so much going on. There is multiple papers coming out every month about ChatGPT is doing this or how artificial intelligence is doing that. My focus is more broadly on writing and our relationship to communication. And authorship comes into that a little bit, as authorship is a way that writing and communicative text circulate through the social body. So yeah, it's just hard to piece everything together, and it's all moving so quickly. And I think one thing that traditional scholarship is struggling to keep up with is this peer review process a lot of the time. Although it's quite important for the integrity of the work, it often is, at least in some ways, outdated by the time it gets to publication. So it's sort of like building the plane is we're flying it, I guess.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about some of the ideas behind your research. I know you're only pretty early in the process, but what's driving you? What are the questions you're looking at and the things that's happening in the space?
Well, taking it back, actually, if I can talk really briefly about my master's work. So for my master's, I looked at this subreddit called Subreddit Simulator, which is a space where a whole bunch of Reddit users have come together and they use the Reddit API, which is the application programming interface, to train bots off of other Reddit data. And so what that has created is a whole bunch of bots that sort of speak with this weird, zany vernacular, very much a simulation of what your average Reddit user might sound like. And of course, this is specified by their training data. So, for example, there was quite a toxic bot that they created that was trained off the r/the Donald, which is quite a notorious subreddit for fans of the President Donald Trump. So anyway, what this sort of yielded is this weird space where it's a simulation of what Reddit is, and the communication in there I found really fascinating because the bots and the humans are able to interact with each other on a very flat plane. Fast forward that, so I did that research in 2022, in the middle of 2022. And fast forward to the end of that year, ChatGPT was released on a mass scale, which I feel has really sped up these processes of simulation and artificial intelligence communication that's really been brought to the fore by these kind of communities that were previously very niche, but now we're seeing it on a more broad societal scale.
Yeah. The question of were the users in those Reddit groups or in that Reddit, in that subreddit, were they aware of when they were talking to a bot? Because you said it was a very flat interaction. Was it just that they were in the same conversational space, or were they aware which user was a bot and which wasn't?
Yeah, so this is one of the I did interviews with some of the bot developers, and yeah, like this governance aspect came up quite a lot actually, and so every time a bot posted, the bot automatically had a flare with like
Mm-hmm.
it tagged itself as a bot. It was identifiable as a bot. But when we take that out of the context of the subreddit community now, with like the rise of ChatGPT or all these other large language models and image generators, we're not always sure whether we're interacting with a bot or not, or we're not really sure whether something is or isn't AI generated, which I think is a really fascinating blurring of the communicative boundaries between human or not human. And it really taps into a lot of long-standing conversations in like media theory and communications theory.
Yeah. I mean, these are the questions that have driven sci-fi for decades. Right.
Totally, like ideas of what a robot or a computer or artificial intelligence is really like co-constituted with these imaginaries of what science fiction is, or what like they co-influence each other. So yeah.
I'm a huge fan of science fiction, and I saw a conversation yesterday kind of taking on the notion that science fiction predicts the future. It's like, no, what they're doing is just describing what's happening now, but they might be overemphasizing, ramping it up, right? So the stuff that sci-fi authors have been talking about for decades, they're always commentating on the current day, but then they amp it up. But now we are at the point at which that overemphasis is sort of happening with some of these bots that you, particularly in spaces like social networks, you can't tell, as you
Yeah,
say.
totally. It's just going back to like to dwell on the sci-fi notion for a second there as well. Like, there's such a long ingrained history of what we think humans are and what we think machines are, and I think the really fascinating thing that is being perhaps broken down, or is giving us food to rethink these long-standing conceptions of what a human is. But when the machine is able to communicate as well as we are in language that is intelligible to us, it really does lead into this quite interesting situation. And science fiction has had so much to do with that, and as you say, like it's getting to a situation where the lines are being a bit blurred, and we're seeing that in like the 2024 American elections this year will be very interesting, and just even daily news stories. I saw one the other day from a principal in Maryland went on a racist tirade against a student, but when it was analyzed properly, it turned out that this whole tirade was AI generated. Even the person that analyzed this audio recording of this person saying all this horrible stuff said, we can never be 100% sure whether it is or is not genuine. There's just so much food for thought in like pretty much every space imaginable.
So I guess the question that came to mind for me was, do we need to be able to distinguish in every circumstance between a bot and a human, or if they are performing certain functions in those environments, should we just assume that they're human actors in a way, because that's kind of what we're taking them as? Like, does the question even matter?
Yeah, completely. Like, that's something I'm trying to grapple with as well in my research. Like, yeah, does this classification of human or bot or not really even matter? There was some interesting work that I read at the end of last year that argued for a conception of bots as an extension of the human,
Mm-hmm.
and under a more legal framework, which was really interesting. But once again, this is like a conversation that's been going on in media theory for decades. Like McLuhan thought
I
of,
was going to say it's
yeah,
McLuhan-esque.
yeah. It's very much like we're building back into these repetitive, iterative conversations. So a big part of this process as well is trying to figure out what's new and what's not new.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a challenge there when AI research is one of the oldest fields of research in computing. Right, it's been going since the 50s. But people think it only started at the end of 2022 with the release of ChatGPT, right? So that instead we've got all these algorithms and various AIs driving our all sorts of decisions, our tools, the technology we use every day for going on 20 years now at least. So
Yeah, completely. Like, and I think a lot of something that's really important to remember when thinking about these technologies and even the internet more broadly is that it came out of that big technological drive that was sort of stimulated and necessitated by World War II. And diving back into like ideas around human machine interaction, it's like a body of work called cybernetics,
yeah,
which came out of interactions between humans and anti-aircraft guns during the Second World War, and research completed at the Michigan Institute of Technology. So yeah, these things have um, a really old history and quite a long genealogy. So yeah, it's there's just so much going on.
if we look specifically at creative work, and you talked about writing and communication, so taking those as sort of creative forms, to ask that obvious question, then what are some of the ways that we think AI is going to shake up or change creative work?
We saw last year quite an interesting case unfold with the 2023 Hollywood writers' strike, in
Mm-hmm.
which, um, in their resolution contract of that strike, which went on for quite a long while, AI was a really huge part of that contract. Writers wanted to ensure that these Hollywood studios could not supplement their writing with AI written content, and they wanted to ensure that their jobs were protected um, against being sort of outbidden by this content that is just so quick to generate and very indistinguishable from the human. So that is probably like the most immediate sort of example. Like people have this fear that it's going to automate journalism or it's going to automate media content writers in some way. And then you've got more abstract sort of versions as well, where AI is able to create music or art. There's like heaps and heaps of image generators out there that people are quite actively using. So yeah, like there's just a like I've said this a few times already, but there's just even in this conversation, like there's just so much going on with the field at the moment.
Mm.
And coming back to the science fiction, like I think this idea of humans being sort of taken over by machines is something that's really quite deeply ingrained, and we see this playing out in discourses even around like writing and creativity. So yeah, it's really all plays back for me at least to a re-examination of what it really means to be human,
Hmm.
which is no small question.
I spotted this week the emergence of a service that is aiming to act as a kind of broker between content creators, I think specifically journalists and others, and the AI services. So, in the same way that, you know, over the last decade, there's been fights around the social media sites and the search engines paying for content. Now, there's the same question of do particular news sources or particular content makers get sort of privileged by AI companies and paid for their content that can be recreated and fed into these AI questions, not just as training data, but actually on the customer side, so that it's there for people to access legitimized information. And I started to think, we just it feels like we're looking at a sort of arms race here of, okay, we automate journalism, and maybe that starts to operate by picking up quotes out of a couple of different press releases and stitching those together, which uncharitably is what some of journalism is sometimes. And so then the AI sort of creates a story by pulling quotes from a couple of different sources. And then, so similar with SEO, you get pretty good at landing your quotes into the AI to get fed into journalism,
totally,
to get fed back into the AIs. It seems like it becomes this really big, weird, circular system of content just flowing all around. And I wonder where the readers are in this process, where the actual humans for whom the information is theoretically being produced in the first place even operate.
Yeah, completely. Like there's so much to unpack there as well. Like even towards the end of last year, like the rise of this sort of new and emerging job title called prompt engineers. People that are just there to generate a good prompt to get a good output from a text generator like ChatGPT. Like businesses and like law firms and many other different kinds of enterprises are already integrating this new kind of role and hiring for it. So yeah, like locating the human in all of this is like a massive task, and it all comes back a lot of the time, as many things do, to this issue of politics and how we want the world to be. Kay Crawford, in her book, The Atlas of AI, has this great quote, which she says, AI is politics by other means. And yeah, like it sort of does raise these quite serious political questions of what kind of future do we want to have, and what kind of jobs should people be doing? How should we consume information? These are all really, really big questions that I think AI is just really bringing to the fore in so many ways.
There are long-standing sort of notions of ownership and attribution and copyright that we've tended to see in creative processes. How do you think the AI or the use of AI in creative industries might change those things?
I'm pretty
or is
sure.
That the question you're trying to answer in your whole thesis?
Yeah, like it's interesting because there is like the ongoing suit of the writers. There's the American Writers Guild, which represents a whole bunch of really quite high-profile authors like George R.R. Martin, who created Game of Thrones, and he is suing OpenAI because him and many other authors are claiming that their work has been improperly used to train these large language models, which are trained off thousands and thousands of different contents. And yeah, like there is a totally legitimate claim to that, because OpenAI is generating these, or training rather, these large language models that are generating them a lot of profit, and advancing and changing the game, so to speak, for communication. And so locating who is attributable for these processes is something that's quite difficult. And this comes back to, like, once again, to art. It's also very relevant there, where we're seeing like AI generated images being used, for example, as like album covers or event posters or something. Who is responsible for that? It's a very muddy, thin line that people are, having quite serious debates about. So yeah, it's the jury is still out, I guess.
Are these primarily ethical issues, or are they legal questions? And obviously, law and ethics isn't separate, but are they things that we need to think about on a social level, or are they things that there should be legal responses to, do you think?
Man, I think they're a bit of everything. Like, honestly, it's a socio-legal, it's a socio-cultural. I think the most important thing at the end of the day is that these are social issues. is I typically don't think that current interpretations of legal ownership are probably apt or being adopted to just blanket generative AI generated content. I'm deeply suspicious of legal frameworks that aim to just punish or control for the sake of monopolization. So yeah, I think my gut reaction is that they're social issues, and I think as a society we need to have quite strong conversations about where is the human in all of this, like we've discussed today, and also how can we use these technologies not to just service capital, but to service society and what we need. I think just a bit of a side note here, but also these machines are hugely costly to the environment, and if we're going to use them and seriously integrate them into the society that we're working towards or that we're building, we need to do a bit of a cost and benefit analysis of these things, because these machines are, continuing a very destructive legacy of global warming that is going to unfold in the future. And if they're being deployed to just service, a very small bunch of actors' financial aspirations, then I think we really should be quite seriously considering whether it's even something we want to have in our society.
That's a major ethical question, right? I think there was a report last year that said making an image with generative AI uses as much energy as charging your phone. So,
totally.
So taking two pieces of modern technology that are becoming sort of indispensable and saying, well, one is a 30-second generation, one is an all-day usage. And if there are millions or billions of these generations constantly, and if they're built into every process on the phones, and if they're built into every process on the computers and everything else, then it starts to add up very quickly. And as you say, in a world in which we are facing climate disaster after disaster, not only do we need to modify our current behavior, but we need to make sure we don't go down a path that makes everything worse.
Yeah, completely. Like anecdotally, like searching up on Twitter or like Reddit, just, like looking at different ways people are using AI in the vernacular. Like, there's this quite amusing example of the Snapchat AI, and people have this sort of ongoing joke about since they can't perhaps afford to go see a psychiatrist or something, they're using Snapchat AI as their own therapist, and they're sort of laughing about it as a bit of a joke. But like this goes to the heart of other social issues around healthcare and mental health care, but also these interactions, these very whimsical and humorous interactions, have a very true material cost, and it's just something that you don't really think about when you're interacting with, Snapchat AI or ChatGPT, but in reality, there's a data center somewhere out there in the world that's processing your user input, and that data center chews through a hell of a lot of power, a hell of a lot of water, and a lot of material in putting it together. There's just so much to speak about when it comes to these machines, because they're not just one thing, they're many things all at once.
Now, to pull out the crystal ball a little bit and look into the future, let's just say AI is used really widely in all creative fields. What do you think then the role of human creativity is in that society?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know, like for me, I don't know, I don't want to be like anthropocentrist or, I don't want to center the human too much, because there's so many different merits that these machines have, and I think they can be used. Like it really, for me, it typically comes down to the user. Like if you want to create art that is half oil on canvas and then like half AI generated, like go for it. Create something new and create something cool and something that you'd be proud to show off to people. I don't know. I find it a a lot of people like to say, oh, AI art isn't art or something, but I think that's just a bit snobbish, to be honest. And like, sure, like we can have long-standing debates around whether something is or isn't art, but people have been doing that for years. So I don't know, like if we're going to seriously use machines in creative work, like I'm all for it, so long as these machines are not being used to the detriment of artists, which I
Yeah.
think then puts into service issues around political economy. And yeah, so I don't know. My broad consensus is AI art is cool with a but.
Yeah. There's a there's an interesting question there around a lot of that debate around whether AI has a place in art. You know, artists are often claiming that it doesn't, and not all and not universally, but they're often saying, you know, the point of art is to be human. There are two sides to that. Like any communication, there's also the receptive side to that. And if people are responding to a piece of AI generated art in an effective way, or with affect, then that side of the coin is still being met, I guess.
Totally.
Yeah, these are absolutely open questions that, you know, I guess I'm just musing. My local show, you know, I live in a regional town, and my local country show, the photography competition organizer was on telly this week talking about how he's going to be, or he has added edited, so Adobe Photoshop
Mm-hmm.
options and categories, and next year they're going to add artificial intelligence categories to the photo competitions in the local country show. So that'll be interesting to watch how that
Yeah, that's cool,
unfolds.
man. Yeah, like I don't know, it does open up so many different categories and new horizons for people to experiment creatively. So I don't know, like I'm personally all for it. Like I think it will take society in interesting places, but I think we also have to approach these places with a bit of trepidation and a bit of like with cool heads, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah, like if it can be integrated into the everyday creative lives of people, I don't see why not.
Are you a fan of June?
I actually haven't seen the movies or read the book.
Oh, okay.
Um,
What the reason I asked that question is I think it's really interesting that June is coming back into the cultural consciousness now, because
totally.
one of the world building aspects of June is that thinking computers have been banned in this society for 10,000 years. And so instead, we get highly specialized humans who act as human computers, who are doing that work. And so there's no, you know, there are machines, obviously quite powerful machines, but they are not computers in the same way that we think of them nowadays, because there was this literally a violent uprising against kind of AI and
Hmm.
against thinking machines,
Totally.
and so 10,000 years later, then that's when June is kind of set. So um,
That's that's really interesting because like that is the only part of June that I really know about.
yeah,
So I'm glad it's the part that we're talking about. But also like as a historical anecdote as well, a computer in the 30s and 40s, around the times when like Alan Turing and people like Norbert Wiener and Arthur Rosenbluth were working on early computing systems. A computer was a person who was tasked to process information through like a typewriter.
yeah,
So once again, like so science fiction imagining of highly specialized humans very much has a real life human origin that is historically rooted. So once again, we're seeing like social influencing sci-fi and vice versa.
yeah. I was just going to ask, really, is it time for a Butler and Jihad, or are we not quite there yet?
Yeah, man. I mean, maybe in a few years, bro. Like, if I don't know, like coming back to the idea of machine creativity, if that doesn't go too well, then then maybe it's time to just purge them.
Daniel, that's been a really, really interesting conversation. If people want to follow your work, what's the best way to do that?
That's a good question, actually. You can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter is Dano, like DANNNO0O, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I'm around. Look me up on the QT website.
I'll put a link to your profiles in the show notes.
Thank you so much, man.
Thanks for listening. Background music by Audio Coffee.